There is a spot in the sand directly beneath the right paw of the Great Sphinx, and in 1998, the Egyptian government drilled into it, looked at what was there, and then quietly sealed it back up. They never released the full results. They never let an independent team finish the work. And to this day, the one part of the Giza Plateau that a blind American man predicted would hold a hidden chamber is the exact part that Egypt will not allow anyone to fully excavate. That American never set foot in Egypt. He gave his description while lying on a couch with his eyes closed, in a trance, in the year 1932. He said there was a passage that ran from the right forepaw of the Sphinx down into a sealed room. He gave the direction. He gave the location. He said the entrance was near that paw and that the chamber lay between the Sphinx and the river. For 60 years, everyone laughed at him. Then, teams brought machines to Giza that can see through solid rock, and the machines found a void, a rectangular cavity, under the paws, exactly where a man with his eyes closed said it would be. That is not the strange part. The strange part is what happened after they found it. The scans got restricted. The permits got denied. The lead researchers got contradicted by the government within days. And the men who kept pushing to open it were told again and again that no excavation had ever been approved, that nothing was there, that the whole thing was a fantasy. But you do not seal a fantasy. You do not drain a chamber that does not exist. You do not spend 30 years denying permits to dig up empty rock. So, this is the real question. Not whether there is a room under the Sphinx. The scans have answered that. The question is what is inside it? Why 3 separate lines of evidence all point to the same buried space? And why the country that owns it has spent decades making sure no outsider ever gets to look. We are going to walk through this the way an investigator would. There is a prediction that should have been impossible. There is a monument that appears to be far older than the history books allow. There is a set of modern scans that map something enormous underground. And there is a pattern of official silence that has followed every single team that got close. By the end, the picture that assembles itself is stranger than any story you have been told about Egypt, and it is built almost entirely out of things that actually happened. Start with the monument itself, because most people have never really looked at it. The Great Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, carved from a single mass of limestone bedrock, the body of a lion and the face of a man. The official story is clean and simple. Pharaoh Khafre built it around 2500 BCE, roughly 4,500 years ago. And the blocks cut away to shape its body were dragged off to build the temples that sit right in front of it. Mark Lehner, one of the most respected archaeologists ever to work at Giza, spent years mapping every stone. His conclusion matched the textbook: Old Kingdom, Khafre, case closed. Except the body of the Sphinx has a problem that will not go away. And it is not written on a tablet. It is carved into the stone by water. Look at the deep enclosure the Sphinx sits in, the pit of rock that surrounds its body. The walls of that pit are covered in vertical channels, rounded, flowing, wavy grooves that run from top to bottom. To most tourists, it looks like weathering, nothing unusual. But in the early 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch from Boston University stood in that enclosure and saw something that stopped him cold. That was not wind damage. Wind carves horizontal patterns. It scoops and scallops sideways. What Schoch was looking at was the signature of water. Heavy, sustained rainfall running down those walls for a very long time, cutting vertical channels the way rain cuts a hillside. Here is why that matters. And it is the kind of detail that quietly rewrites everything. Egypt has been a desert for thousands of years. The last time the Giza region saw the kind of prolonged, drenching rainfall that could carve those patterns into limestone was long before Khafre, long before the Old Kingdom. Schoch put the number somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 years before Christ, and possibly much earlier. That pushes the carving of the Sphinx back thousands of years past the pharaoh who supposedly built it. And there is a second layer to it. The head of the Sphinx and the body of the Sphinx do not weather the same way. The head is comparatively crisp. The body is deeply eroded. Some researchers reading Shouk's work have pointed out that if the whole thing were carved at once, the wear should be roughly even. It is not. That opens the possibility that the body was cut first, weathered for a very long time, under conditions that no longer exist, and the head was recarved later by a pharaoh from an already ancient monument. Which would mean Khafre did not build the Sphinx at all. He inherited it. He put his own face on something that was already old when he found it. Mainstream Egyptology rejected it hard. They argued the erosion came from other causes, from salt crystallizing inside the porous stone, from the notoriously poor quality of the limestone in that lower layer, from centuries of clumsy restoration. The debate is genuinely unsettled, and we will come back to the skeptics because they have real points. But hold on to the core fact, because it is not in dispute that those vertical channels exist. Something poured water down the walls of the Sphinx enclosure for a very long time. And water like that has not fallen on Giza in the time frame the history books allow. So before we ever get underground, the monument is already whispering that it is older than we are told. And a monument that is older than we are told is exactly the kind of thing that might be hiding something the builders never wrote down. That is the first crack in the official story. Now we get to the man who claimed to know what was underneath. His name was Edgar Cayce. In his own time, newspapers called him the sleeping prophet because he did his work asleep. He would lie down, enter a trance, and answer questions in a flat voice about things he had no way of knowing. Most of it was medical. People wrote to him with illnesses, and he would describe treatments. But on July the 1st, 1932, in a reading now cataloged by his own foundation as number 57486, Cayce started talking about Egypt. And he said something very specific. He described a record house, a storehouse of knowledge near the Sphinx. He said a passage led from the right forepaw of the Sphinx to the entrance of this record chamber. He placed it between the Sphinx and the river. In later readings through the 1930s, he added detail on detail. He said the chamber held the history of a lost people. He said it was sealed. He even predicted the window in which it would be found between 1996 and 1998. Now, everything around Cayce's claim is easy to dismiss. He wrapped it in Atlantis, in refugees from a drowned continent, in prophecy and the Second Coming. Strip all of that away, and you are still left with a naked, testable statement made in 1932. There is a hidden chamber. The entrance is by the right paw. It is between the Sphinx and the river. Remember, in 1932, nobody had scanned the Sphinx. There was no ground-penetrating radar at Giza, no seismic survey, no way, with the technology of the day, to know whether there was solid rock or empty space under those paws. A man made a guess with his eyes closed and named a spot. And here is a detail that makes Cayce's fixation on the Sphinx harder to wave away. The monument is not a random statue. It is aligned. Mark Lehner, the mainstream archaeologist, documented it himself. At sunset, on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun drops directly behind the shoulder of the Sphinx and appears to sink into the side of Khafre's pyramid. From a slightly different angle, on those same days, the sun sets in the notch between two of the Great Pyramids, forming a shape the Egyptians wrote as a single glyph, the Akhet, the horizon, the symbol of rebirth, of the sun disappearing into the earth and returning. For decades, scholars dismissed that as coincidence or later interpretation. But think about what it means. The entire Giza complex was engineered as a machine for the sun, a device to catch the light on the exact days the year balances, and turn a monument into a symbol of something passing into the ground and coming back out. A place of descent and return. And if the builders thought that way, above the sand, in stone and shadow, the idea that they cut a chamber for descent below the sand stops sounding like fantasy and starts sounding like the same logic pointed downward. For decades, Cayce's guess just sat there, untested, unprovable. A curiosity in the files of a New Age foundation in Virginia Beach. And if you are new here and you want to follow the kind of investigation where a 90-year-old claim gets checked against modern machines, this is the channel for it. So take a second and subscribe, because what the machines found is where this stops being a story and starts being a problem. Because in the 1990s, the machines finally arrived. A survey backed by Florida State University and a researcher named Thomas Dobecki brought seismic equipment to the Sphinx. Seismic surveying works by sending sound waves into the ground and reading how they bounce back. Solid rock returns one kind of echo. A hollow space returns another. It is the same principle a doctor uses with ultrasound, except pointed down into bedrock. And near the front paws of the Sphinx, the equipment found something, an anomaly, a reading consistent with a cavity in the rock, later described as a rectangular space, roughly 25 feet beneath the monument's front paws. Rectangular, not a natural cave. Natural caves are irregular. They wander. They follow the weakness in the stone. A rectangle has corners. Corners suggest intention. Corners suggest something cut. And it was near the paws. The paws Cayce named in 1932. And the location was not vague. The survey work through the 1990s, sponsored by Florida State University and pushed forward by researchers connected to the Cayce Foundation, kept circling the same zones. An anomaly near the paws. Possible cavities in the bedrock. A rectangular reading that refused to behave like natural stone. The team even estimated a depth. Roughly 25 feet down, beneath the front paws, sat a space that returned the echo of a cut chamber rather than solid limestone. This is the moment the story should have exploded into the open. A prophecy from a man in a trance in 1932, matched 60 years later by sound waves fired into solid rock, both pointing at the same paw, at nearly the same depth. So what happened next? Beginning in 1996 and running into 1998, right inside Cayce's predicted window, the Supreme Council of Antiquities permitted a limited round of investigation. And here, the record gets murky in a way that has never fully cleared. There was an exploration. There was a deep shaft near the Sphinx, sometimes called the water shaft, a strange multi-level cutting in the bedrock, partly filled with groundwater, that got drained and inspected around 1999. Led by Zahi Hawass, the most powerful figure in Egyptian archaeology for a generation. It was even filmed. A live television special aired around the descent into that shaft, promising revelations. Officially, the verdict came back negative. A tomb, they said, old, waterlogged, empty of anything like a hall of records, nothing matching Cayce's chamber, natural and man-made rock. Move along. But notice the sleight of hand. Draining and filming one particular shaft is not the same as excavating the rectangular anomaly by the paw. Answering one question loudly is a very effective way to avoid answering another one quietly. And the paw anomaly, the specific rectangular void the seismic team flagged, the one that sat exactly where Cayce pointed, was never dug out and shown to the world. But the story never sat right, because the exploration was tightly controlled. The full data on that paw anomaly was never handed to an independent team to finish. Every request to properly excavate the rectangular void got denied, then and for years after, with the same reason given every time. Protect the monument. Do not disturb the stone. It was found, it was scanned, and then it was closed. That is the pattern. Hold on to it, because it is about to repeat on a scale nobody saw coming. Because the paw chamber, the rectangular void 25 feet down, turned out to be the small story. In the last 2 years, a new team pointed a far more powerful technology at the plateau. And what they say they found does not fit under a paw. It does not fit under the Sphinx. It barely fits under the entire Giza Plateau. Here is where it gets strange. Around 2025 and into 2026, two researchers, Filippo Biondi at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland and Corrado Malanga from Italy, went public with results from a technique called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. This is not the ground-penetrating radar of the 1990s. SAR uses satellite-based radar signals and reads the tiny vibrations in the ground to build a three-dimensional map of what lies beneath the surface. It is the same family of technology used to map terrain from orbit. They pointed it at Giza, under a project they described as mapping below the Pyramid Plateau. And the map they produced is staggering. They reported a vertical shaft descending from the center of the base of the Sphinx, a spiral, staircase-like structure winding down into the rock, and two enormous chambers, each measuring roughly 131 feet by 131 feet, one of them sitting nearly 2,000 feet below the surface, and another twice as deep, around 4,000 feet down, connected by the shaft, squared off, symmetrical. Then they went further. They said the scans showed the same pillar-like formations under the Sphinx that they had already mapped under the Khafre and Menkaure pyramids. 8 vertical cylinder-shaped structures, horizontal passages branching outward. A network so large, they claimed, that the whole thing could rival the Giza Plateau itself in size. Biondi used a single word for it on a podcast. Megastructure. Something huge, he said, measured beneath the plateau. And Malanga, the Italian half of the team, put a date on it that is hard to even process. He argued the scans point to engineering on the plateau that predates the dynastic era entirely, possibly tens of thousands of years old. A number so far outside the accepted timeline that mainstream archaeology cannot even engage with it without laughing. But notice how it rhymes with the water on the enclosure walls. 2 completely unrelated lines of evidence. One carved by rain, one read by satellite radar, both pushing the real age of this place back into a past we have no records for. They presented these findings at a conference in North Carolina called the Cosmic Summit, alongside a partnership described as the Khafre Research Project. And they tied it, out loud, to the oldest legend on the plateau, the Hall of Records, the very chamber Edgar Cayce had described from a couch in 1932. They even went a step further and claimed the same radar signatures suggested a second Sphinx, a mirrored structure buried under a nearby mound, matching a theory the Egyptologist Bassam el-Shamma had raised years earlier from the ancient texts alone. 2 independent roads, the old records and the new radar, arriving at the same buried twin. Now stop and feel the shape of this. A blind man in a trance names a hidden chamber near the paw. Seismic waves in the 1990s find a rectangular void near the paw. And satellite radar in the 2020s maps a shaft descending from the base of the Sphinx into vast, squared chambers deep below. 3 completely different methods, 3 completely different decades, all converging on the idea that the ground under the Sphinx is not solid. Not similar claims, not vaguely related. The same spot, the same monument, the same buried space, described again and again by people who could not have coordinated across 90 years. And there is one more piece the ancient Egyptians themselves left sitting between the paws, in plain sight, that almost nobody reads correctly. Wedged directly between the front paws of the Sphinx stands a slab of granite called the Dream Stele. It was placed there by the pharaoh Thutmose IV, around 1401 BCE. The carving on it tells a story. A young prince falls asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx and dreams that the monument speaks to him, promising him the throne if he clears the sand away from its body. For over 3,000 years, that stele has sat right on top of the exact spot the seismic surveys later flagged. And here is the detail the tourists miss. The carving on the dream stele does not show one sphinx. It shows two. Two sphinx figures, back to back, mounted on a shared base. Mainstream reading says it is just decorative symmetry, artistic convention, nothing to see, and maybe. But Biondi's team has argued the two figures might not be symbolism at all. They think it could be a map, a clue that the layout of the monuments was mirrored, and that a second structure was buried nearby. That claim is speculative and unproven, and even Biondi puts his confidence around 80%, which is another way of saying he is not sure. But you have to sit with the coincidence. The one carving placed directly over the anomaly shows a doubled sphinx, a mirrored structure, a hint of something else beneath the sand. The Egyptians, who set that stone there, were not archaeologists guessing. They were standing on the plateau 3,000 years ago, closer to whatever the truth is than we will ever be. They were not drawing a decoration. They may have been recording a location. So now we have 4 threads. A monument scarred by rainfall that should predate its own builders. A 1932 prophecy that named a chamber by the paw. Seismic and radar scans across 3 decades that keep finding voids in the same place. And an ancient carving sitting on top of it. All that appears to show 2 structures where the history books allow only 1. And every time someone gets close enough to open it, the door closes. That is the part that turns curiosity into suspicion. Because the response from Egyptian authorities has been remarkably consistent and remarkably fast. When Biondi and Malanga went public, Zahi Hawass, the towering figure of Egyptian archaeology, rejected the findings outright. He stated flatly that no scientific research had been approved or conducted at the site by the Egyptian government. He called the idea of an underground city a huge exaggeration. Former antiquities ministers piled on, calling the claims baseless. Other experts noted, correctly, that the work had not been peer-reviewed, that it existed as a press conference and a set of radar images rather than a published paper. And the Supreme Council of Antiquities, the body that controls every trowel of dirt moved at Giza, has for decades refused permission to excavate the anomalies, always citing the same reason. Protect the monument. Hold that reason up to the light. It is not wrong to want to protect the Sphinx. It is one of the most precious objects humanity has ever made. But notice what the reason accomplishes. It means the one place 3 independent technologies keep flagging is the one place no shovel is ever allowed to touch. The void stays sealed. The data stays contested. And the only people permitted to make definitive statements about what is or is not down there are the same officials who deny that any authorized study ever took place. It was scanned, it was flagged, and then it was locked. Now, this is the point where an honest investigation has to slow down and turn on itself. Because it would be easy to keep stacking the coincidences and let you walk away certain there is an Atlantean library glowing under the sand. And that is almost certainly not true. So let us be adults about it. Does any of this prove a lost civilization? No. Does it prove a hall of records full of Atlantean scrolls? No. Take the strongest version of the skeptic's case seriously, because it is strong. Lawrence Conyers, a radar specialist at the University of Denver, pointed out something that should give everyone pause. Detecting neat, room-sized structures 4,000 feet below the surface is beyond what current radar can reliably do. That is not a cover-up talking. That is physics. The deeper you look, the fuzzier the signal, and the easier it is to see rooms and staircases in what is really just noise and rock. The Biondi scans have not passed peer review. They were announced at a conference known for unconventional theories, not in a journal. That matters. And Cayce, for all the eerie precision of the paw, got plenty wrong. His window of 1996 to 1998 came and went with no grand opening. His Atlantis framework has no archaeological support at all. When the 1990s team drilled into an anomaly near the paw, one account has it revealing only natural rock. The water erosion argument that makes the Sphinx older, powerful as it looks in that enclosure, is genuinely disputed by serious geologists who blame the limestone itself. So here is the honest, grounded version. And it is still remarkable. Giza is riddled with real voids. That is not fringe. Egyptologists, including Hawass and Lehner, have documented tunnels and shafts cut into the bedrock around the Sphinx. Ancient cultures very often built sacred monuments directly over natural caves. The Maya did it constantly, and the limestone under Giza is exactly the kind of rock that forms cavities. So the most sober reading is this. There probably are chambers, shafts, and cut passages under and around the Sphinx. Some natural, some man-made, some tombs, some quarry cuts, some perhaps ritual spaces we do not yet understand. Not a city, not Atlantis, but a genuine, unmapped underworld beneath the most famous statue on Earth that the authorities have chosen, for reasons of their own, to keep sealed rather than reveal. That version does not need aliens or lost continents, and it is still one of the great unopened doors in archaeology. But even the sober version leaves the hard question standing, and it is the question that will not let this story die. If there is nothing down there, why not simply prove it? Why deny the permits instead of granting one careful, supervised excavation that would settle a 90-year-old argument in an afternoon? A single clean dig into that rectangular void by the right paw would either find rock and end the legend forever, or find a cut chamber and rewrite the story of Giza. Egypt has the resources. Egypt has the experts. What it does not have, apparently, is the will to look. And if the Sphinx really was carved by rain that has not fallen in 9,000 years, then somebody was standing on that plateau, shaping that stone, long before the pharaohs we credit. Somebody whose name we do not know, whose history we do not have, whose records, if they kept any, might be exactly the kind of thing you would seal in a chamber and cut a passage to from the paw of a lion. That is the chapter our history is missing. Not the pharaohs, the people before them, the ones the Sphinx may have been built to remember. The scans are done, the void is mapped, the carving between the paws still shows two figures where there should be one. And beneath the sand, 25 feet down by the right paw, and perhaps far deeper still, a squared-off space that three separate technologies across three separate decades keep insisting is there, sits in the dark, exactly where a sleeping man said it would be. Nobody has opened it. Nobody is allowed to. It was predicted, it was found, and then it was buried again by the silence of the people who guard it. And it is still there right now, under the paws of the Sphinx, sealed, waiting, while the tourists file past above it and never look down. If this pulled you in, the next investigation on screen goes even deeper into what the guardians of these monuments do not want opened. Watch it now.